Scott Over, welcome to Sports Management Podcast.
Pleasure to be here.
It's my great pleasure to have you on the show and really excited about today's episode. So, for those of you who might not know who you are the co-founder of Sporting Giants, a new purpose-led sports consultancy. So, can you tell the listeners and myself a little bit about what is Sporting Giants?
Yeah, so Sporting Giants is a purpose-led consultancy that helps brands and rights holders create impact through strategy, activation, sustainability programs, etc. And along with my co-founder, Dan Redding, we're working with a lot of international federations, a lot of national governing bodies, and some really exciting brands. So yeah, we're just trying to create impact or value wherever we see it, and bringing together some really great specialists as well that have got some good experience, decades of experience within international sport, high performance sport, and the management of sport, so sports administration.
Interesting. So you're providing some support for those interested in sustainable sport and sustainability in and around sport. So why is that so important?
I think each person comes at it from a different angle, and Dan and I come at it from a different angle as well, individually. But I think for me in particular, it's about the survival of our sport. So whatever sport you're in, making sure that it's sustainable means that it's going to exist for decades in the future. And if we take sailing as an example, and we take environmental sustainability in particular, the playground that I had when I was growing up sailing is very different to the playground that I have now. And the winds that were constant or regular, the waves, what you could predict and where you could set a regatta date to, was a lot more understood. Whereas now we're seeing a lot of variety and our playground being impacted. And I think if you look at many sports, you're seeing typical dates within the calendar where elite competition took place, now not being able to take place. And the other side of it is, if we take financial sustainability, I think you're also seeing a lot of sports off the back of COVID or with the energy crisis struggling. So struggling to get enough funds to keep their venues open, to keep equipment participation up, making sure that sport is front and center of society, because it adds so much value and impact that if it was to disappear, because it doesn't have the resources, it doesn't have the funds, it doesn't have the environmental conditions to be able to participate, is going to be a hell of a loss. And I think it's those considerations that we're trying to bring Sporting Giants expertise to create a longer runway, and I think you're seeing a lot of sports struggling at the moment, just to survive, just to keep their Olympic status, just to create competitions that don't get cancelled at the last minute or removed from calendars. I think that's the approach that we're taking.
That's super interesting and of course important. And I mean, the changes that has to be done will have to be done on like a government level or an organizational level. Of course, everyone can do theirs in terms of recycling and so forth, but I know that you're working with some GBs and some larger organizations to make change. So can you talk a little bit about that? I know the UK Sport Project, for example.
Yeah, so I think it started way before my time and my involvement with sustainability, but Dan, as in particular, was involved in the creation of the Sport for Climate Action Framework, which I think, for background, and I'm sure all of your listeners know, but it was created because the UN identified that fashion and sport had a huge influence on the way in which people behave, and also it has an impact on governments potentially. So the idea was to bring together a bulk of leaders within the industry and create this signatory approach. And that's creating more of a coalition of understanding and also pressure to create change at a government level. And I think the project that you mentioned with UK Sport, so that's the accelerator program. So between Sporting Giants and our partners, Useful Projects, we're delivering for UK Sport carbon footprinting and also carbon action plans, so sustainability strategies for all of the sports that's supported by UK Sport. And so that's, as far as I'm aware, that's a one-off globally, where you have one umbrella institution that is supporting all of their NGBs to get to a certain level, which then enables them to become signatories of the Sport for Climate Action framework. And we're also seeing clusters of sports coming together with a similar purpose. So, for example, a lot of the sports that are playing and competing within water have formed a coalition, and that was announced maybe a month ago. So you get like the RYA, you have British Rowing, etc., all coming together and lobbying against government about clean water. And sometimes, as an individual governing body, it can be seen as quite aggressive or negative to stand up and say, hey, our water is horrible and we need to do something about it. But if you have this coalition approach where everyone is saying the same thing, everyone is driving in the same direction, it's really hard to argue against that. And also these national governing bodies have hundreds of thousands of members, and their lobbying power as a whole is a lot more powerful than the individual or even the individual sport talking on its own, because it's impacting UK sport and UK Olympic sport. You know, so a lot of people can really buy into that, and the impact that they're creating is pretty unbelievable.
Yeah. And I mean, you're an avid sailor and have worked also in sailing. So you took that as an example that the winds are changing, the water is different, and of course the temperature is changing as well. So, I mean, what can we do, or what do national governing bodies, what can they do to help, make an active change?
Well, I think you need to understand what impact it has on your sport. So with sailing, sailors they can feel the change. They can see if the water is dirty or full of plastic, or if the winds during a certain month are extreme. So going 40 knots or absolutely becalmed, whereas normally you would have a consistent wind pattern. You're seeing and you're feeling the impact. So I think, especially with a lot of sports that are outside, you're noticing, okay, my sports ground's been flooded, and it's been flooded for the last 4 weeks of the season. So we can't even start the season on our home ground, which was 10 years ago a norm. Like we start in May and we go through till September if we're lucky enough to win enough matches to make it that far. But that isn't happening at the moment. And I think what we're finding is that there are certain elements and certain changes within sport that can be made for this to create this longer runway. So to be more sustainable, both financially, but also for the betterment from an environmental point of view, putting in systems and things in places which make you more efficient. And that's where we're seeing a lot of change. And I think NGBs in particular, when you're talking about control and influence, their influence is massive because they have a membership, and they also have the ability to talk at government level if they need to. So if you just focus on your headquarters where you might have 25 staff, that is what you can control. And I think as you move out from that, you're looking at what you can influence. And that's where sport has the power, because they have a large influence. We have role models, we have athletes that have a big voice. And on the whole, athletes talk very well and they're very well respected. And it's empowering those athletes to make sure that sustainability or impact is at the top of the agenda for them, because it, especially with athletes that are working in the outdoors, they're being impacted more than ever. And you know, you take ice hockey as an example, those venues are shutting all the time because of the energy crisis, and they weren't supported by the government during COVID because they were seen as entertainment venues. So they've got a unique issue here, and it's keeping all sports and the variety of sports so that you have an opportunity to do whatever you want as part of your well-being, your fitness, you know, everything. It's just integral part of life that you need to keep alive.
Mm. And I mean, measuring carbon footprint is one way to like measure it, but is that the best way, the only way, or is there, how else can you track how well a GB is doing, for example?
Well, carbon footprinting is a tool, and it allows you to identify areas of strength and weakness. So you typically start with finances. So using finances, you can make assumptions as to what your organization actually does and where it spends its money and where you're creating the largest amount of carbon, which tends to be travel. International travel will tend to be. But also it allows you to get an understanding of where the opportunities lie because of creating a carbon report. And then you create an action plan based on your emissions. And you know, we have experts that do that can identify exactly the opportunities for the areas that you can control and then the areas that you can influence, like we just discussed. But essentially you start with finances, and it's the finances that then can illustrate where the opportunities lie, whether that's within your own building or whether in your travel, within a calendar, within the type of things that you buy. So it just gives you a starting point, and it's an objective tool that you can use to then inform your own organization to improve.
Interesting. So I know that you're also like work on the significance, the synergies between sustainability and strategy. I guess that's a little bit what you're mentioning there, right? To see it from a financial perspective as well.
Yeah, and also just making sure that you're taking advantage of what a sport is doing in its day-to-day and knowing the value that it provides for potential partners. Because I think when you're in the day-to-day within an NGB or within an IF, the work that you're doing could be seen as just the norm, and you don't understand the value that it could potentially have for commercial partners or institutional partnerships, where you're providing value that cannot be obtained by a commercial entity. For example, access to youth and to grow youth, sport has a really good impact within youth, and to be able to communicate to youth. And a lot of corporates or a lot of commercials have no way to do that. You know, they're not interesting to youth, regardless of if their products are being used. It's very hard to engage with certain populations, and sport is an amazing way to engage with multiple populations. And it's understanding that value, or trying to give a steer of understanding your value to grow your sport. So for example, if sustainability or gender equality, diversity is something that your sport is very good at, get a partner in to accelerate that work for you. And I think that's where we're finding a lot of growth in that space, is where you're getting purpose-driven partnerships coming into sport, which is also a big difference. So when I started out in sponsorship, the main way in which you value a partnership is equivalent media value. And that is a pseudoscience at best as well. So understanding what brand awareness you can give to a commercial partner is one way of creating a partnership. But now we're seeing more and more commercial partnerships based on purpose. And that's creating an impact through sport on society or on the environment through sustainability, et cetera, et cetera. And it's becoming more and more prevalent. And also it's becoming more of a need as these brands and these partners have sustainability very high on their agenda from a commercial strategy, as in a corporate strategy within them as brands.
Yeah, and I mean, you have a background in partnerships and as a commercial director. So I mean, your insight here is of course really important for now with Sports Giant, and picking a partner, as you said, that can elevate these important aspects in the partnership, I think is also really important. The thing with like when you're making a change, sometimes it's delayed gratification. I feel like with the sustainability, maybe you don't see it right away that you're making a difference. So how do you convince someone? Maybe you see, on we mentioned the financial sides. Maybe you don't make a financial gain in these initiatives in the short run, but maybe in the long run and for the environment. So, how to convince a GB that this is not only like it's a good investment also for the business, but also for the environment, for example.
Yeah, and I think if you talk about the people that you need to influence to put sustainability or purpose at the top of the agenda, the way in which we would talk about it is one, turning sustainability or purpose from a cost center to a profit center. So that's commercializing purpose, and being authentic and genuine in how you do that is key. And one of the ways in which you do that is measuring whatever you're doing. So instead of saying, oh, we're trying to grow participation, how? What metrics do you have to say that you are genuinely growing participation? Or we've had a big decline and we're now trying to change that decline. And getting partners in to support and accelerate that is a really key part of the process. But you need to get your own house in order for anyone to look at you and support you on that journey. The other side of it is, so that's where you're basically creating revenue to support the sustainability or purpose projects that you're doing as an organization. The other side of it is risk, is that if you do not do it, you could be left behind and the impact on your sport could be horrendous. It could be, you could start missing out on central funding. So if we'll take UK Sport or Sport England, just because I live in the UK, they are going to, and they've alluded to, putting sustainability KPIs as part of the way in which they measure the amount of grants and funding they provide to NGBs. And I wouldn't be, I would imagine the IOC would do exactly the same for the IFs. So as the IOC are the key funding partner for the majority of the Olympic sports, if the IOC create that change and say, look, it's going to be a KPI for the future, and you haven't done your homework and you haven't put the foundation in for sustainability and purpose, it could have a huge detrimental impact on one of your main funding partners. So it's sort of the risk of not doing it, and then the reward of doing it by obtaining additional resource or support and growth because you have done it. But yes, you do have a lead time. So having put the foundation in, you're going to have a time scale where, and it's going to be painful as well, because you could have to lose partners that are not aligned to that message. And yeah, you're seeing it a lot. The investment of time and resource into creating that foundation for then longer term gains or the removal of risk is where we see it.
Yeah. And I mean, the more we talk about it, the more I find that finding the right partners is really key here. As you said, you need to find someone, but because then you can also fund your efforts, but you also have a partner that shares your values. And as you said, perhaps might have to drop one or two, but finding those real great partners that shares your vision.
Yeah, and I think also that they provide resource that might not just be cash. So if they are a tech company and you want to do research around certain population groups, they provide you with technology that can help you do that, which would save you 20,000 in the long term, or provide you support to develop certain solutions that if you didn't have a partner, you wouldn't have access to. And I think the commercial partners want to use their products to create impact as well, because it's far sexier to showcase your products in sport than sometimes in their real life clients. In a dog food factory, as an example, I'd rather show a tracking solution in sailing or sport than a logistics company. And it's those showcasing and that type of approach that is really key, and why sport has immense value.
Yeah. So I spoke in an earlier episode with Josie Trahlberg, and one thing that she said when it comes to how can we be better at the environmental sustainability was downscaling bigger events. Is that something you think that will have to be done, or can we find other ways to keep them as they are size-wise, but make them more sustainable?
Yeah, I think that there's loads of ways, especially within major events. There's lots of different ways in which you can downscale them, but also it's the legacy piece, which was sort of brought in maybe in 2012. I would imagine that's the first time maybe I heard of it, where you're not just building huge venues for one-off causes, but they have a repeat use after, and they also have a repeat use in the lead up to the games, as an example. But I think there's also work to be done on calendars. So if you're having and I think Max Verstappen even just mentioned it on the weekend, where he doesn't want to be flying from Asia back to Europe to the US to Asia. It needs a consistent flow. And I think within tennis, they have swings. So they start off in Australia, in Asia, they move to Europe, and then they move to the US. But you're not ping-ponging across the world, and you're not creating a huge footprint compared to if you were flying back and forth all over the place. So I think coordination of calendars is really key. And sometimes combining world championships together is also more logical than having them separate. Or do you work on a biannual, or do you work in a quad cycle? Do you need a world championships every single year? Are you diluting the value that has for the athlete? So those types of things, or combining resources, where if one event or one property requires the same resources as the other, to leave them in place for 3 weeks doesn't really have a huge financial impact above and beyond. So if you were to build it individually 3 times in a row, that's going to have a greater impact than if you leave it in situ and use the same resources. It's going to the end result will probably be the same from a event delivery perspective, but you're going to save a lot of money not having to rebuild those entire structures that are relevant for the same sports. And I think the collaboration piece is one where you can certainly find huge opportunities. And I think also learning from other sports, best practice, it is really key. And questioning, why are you doing that? Like, oh, it's because we've always done that. Okay, why? Why did that process start? And sort of questioning the norm. But I guess to sort of circle back on scaling down events, yes, there's an opportunity to do that. And I think there's loads of opportunities around the various scales of events, but also keeping events as a constant, because, during COVID, that wasn't happening. And it was a huge loss to the world, I thought. So, yeah, keeping the doors open and being able to watch live sport and participate in sport is what I would like to see continue.
Yeah. No, that's so many great points. So yes, of course, downscaling, but then the calendar that you mentioned is, of course, I think that's both from an environmental sustainable standpoint, but also for the athletes, for them to perform better because they don't need to fly all around the world all the time.
Mm.
And then you mentioned like to keep venues. I mean, that's a big talk. Sweden was bidding for the 2030 Winter Olympics, and now it's going to a summer, probably a summer city in France. And then you could argue, isn't it better to host a Winter Olympics somewhere where there are already existing arenas? So I mean, this is always the topics, right? When you talk with the IOC and the FIFA World Cup, for example, the bigger events, like where are they awarded and why?
And whilst trying to protect universality,
Mhm.
so you're not going back to the same venues over and over again. It is quite a tricky thought, because sometimes if you've got a winning solution, just repeat it and it works and everyone's happy. But at the same time, there's this push to diversify sport and take it to areas in the world where they're going to benefit even more than keeping it in the same locations.
Yeah, for sure. And also the learning. You said you can learn from other sports. That's what several. I spoke to Petra Serling. She's the head of the Swedish Table Tennis Federation, and she says that she talks a lot with Anders Larsson from the Ice Hockey Federation. That although their sports are very different, they can learn a ton from each other in best practices and how they do things differently.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of new things coming to sport. So esports, as an example, sustainability is becoming very new. How you communicate as a federation or as an NGB, different audiences. I know a lot of sports, if they start posting about sustainability, there's a massive backlash from the audience about, we just want to hear results. We want to see, highlights. We don't want this propaganda, as it were. But how do you get round that? And how do you engage your audience in an authentic way? Each sport is doing it very, very differently.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's what some sports are afraid of, to get that they don't get the support from the fans, and they're afraid of maybe losing out some fans to make these type of efforts.
Yeah. Yeah, that is it's a big risk, and I think it's also, for some sports, it has to be a slow, consistent burn, where it's being bled throughout the organization, whether it's commercial, financially, from a comms perspective, participation and development. Is there sustainability and purpose being put into coach education programs, as an example? So you're influencing the leaders of the sport to talk about these subjects all the time.
Yeah. And then circling back to sporting giants there, since you are consulting, then your approach must differ as well, depending on if it's a smaller sport or a bigger sport or an outdoor sport or an indoor sport or your advice, I guess, differs a little bit in who you're working with as well.
The variety is wild, because we're working with some federations that have hundreds of millions of revenue. And then you also have some that are scrambling and have 6 members of staff. So your approach to assisting those has to be realistic. and it has to be relevant. And it's a matter of prioritizing what they can change quickly to create the most impact. And some of the projects are very, very niche and specialist. And then some of them are just generic change and creating change within an organization that hasn't changed for 25 years. And seeing opportunities when a couple of international federations have had a huge change within their leadership recently, but that creates an opportunity to take a step back and look at what are the most impactful things that we can do to change this sport. Yeah, and it is completely varied. You know, whether you're talking to a team that we're working with, or a global series, or an international federation, or an NGB, all of them have various issues and opportunities that very quickly you need to understand where they are and how to, for want of a better word, exploit them to benefit the federation as a whole.
I understand that. So before, I'm really interested in your career journey, but before we jump into you, anything else on the sporting giants, maybe something, you know, coming in the near future, or just to finish off this segment?
No, I think we feel like it's a calm before the storm. So we've only been going for 14 months, and it's been a really amazing journey because both Dan and I have always been employees. So we took a jump April last year to set this business up and to keep our fingers crossed that it was going to be a success and that it would continue. But our main focus was to add value in areas where we believed we could add value, and to help as many variety of sports organizations to develop and to grow. I think right now we're just before Wimbledon, we're just before the Euros, we're just before the Olympic Games, and especially for us, we're just before the America's Cup. So we've got a pretty wild ride from now until October, November, where we might be able to take a breather. But it's been amazing, and you know, learning how to run a business and focus on delivering what's best for your partners has been amazing. And it's been a hell of a journey, and I can't even imagine having not done it. So it's been really exciting.
I'm sure. And I am really excited to follow Sporting Giants now and see what will happen.
Thank you.
But yeah, so jumping into your journey, how did you get into the business of sports in the first place?
Uh, I was brought up in a family of sports people. So my mum and dad both played basketball, and they were into all sorts of sports. And I'm sort of the black sheep in the family, in that growing up, I didn't actually play basketball, whereas my brothers and sisters played basketball, and they went on to compete at a high level in basketball. Whereas around the time my father took a break from basketball, when I was starting to learn sport, and so I was focused on tennis. And then I had a friend who I grew up in the village, whose father was an avid sailor. So focused on those, and then also played volleyball to a fairly decent level. So I've always enjoyed sport, and I've always been around sport. My studies took me into physiology, biomechanics, performance analysis. So that was always, you know, if I'm not going to be a pro sportsman necessarily, how can I support those that have the talent to do that? And I think that led me to the ITF. So that was my first job out of university, based in Valencia, with a guy called Miguel Crespo. And he'll probably mind me saying this, but this guy is a legend. And if you want a guest on your podcast who has an amazing career, he had a position called the Assistant Research Officer position based in Valencia. And you essentially sit next to him for X number of years while you're there and become a sponge. And his knowledge of sport and what he has done was unbelievable. I remember first arriving at his office, and I'd done a dissertation that was really good, and that everyone thought, oh, this was amazing. So within the first week, I showed him my dissertation, and he goes, oh, amazing. Do you mind if I make some notes? And he went through the entire dissertation and sent it back to me redlined, and it was just absolutely decimated. Like the thing was like cut, irrelevant, not part of the project. Why is this mentioned? Blah blah. And I was just like, do you know what? Who are you like to comment on that? And then when I was reading it through, I was like, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, that makes it a lot better. So what I felt was really high caliber work was actually just his day to day and trying to keep up with him. He now has 3 PhDs. The guy is an animal when it comes to academics. And he did a PhD during lockdown just because he was bored. I mean, the guy is unbelievable, and he's worked with some of the most amazing people as well. So to ride on his coattails for the 3-4 years that I was in Valencia was just amazing. And then from that position, so where we were focused on ITF touring teams, the development of tennis, coach education, participation pathways, etc. I then moved into event operations. So working in a team of fairly young people, delivering Davis Cup, Fed Cup, the Olympic tennis event. And that's where I was more exposed to not the performance side of sport, but the delivery of events and the delivery of rights for global partners. So we had amazing partners that we learned so much from. And also we had amazing national governing bodies or tennis associations with some, incredible operators. And that was my first sort of taste of the business side of sport. Again, it was an acceleration of understanding, because I'd come from the performance side and not really, I was not really aware of the activation of rights and the protection of rights and exclusivities and all these types of things. And we were basically sent around the world to deliver events in collaboration with these tennis associations. So whether it was the USTA or the Serbian Tennis Association or Federation at the time that was growing a lot, it was a wild ride, and you had so many different issues and problems that you, as an individual, were quite isolated. You always had the support, but you were quite isolated and on your own, and you needed to make fairly big decisions at quite a young age. And so that was an amazing education. Also, I managed to identify what my weaknesses were as well as my strengths quite quickly, and then went into agency side. So worked for a couple of agencies that, again, just matured my understanding of rights delivery, activation, commercial partnerships, where you see symmetries between sport and brands, the different type of categories of businesses that can be used and showcased in sport. So then move from agency side into OC Sport. So OC Sport was Extreme Sailing Series. They had Dongfeng, the ocean race team. But I became the commercial director there. And again, it's a series of events that just have to work. And I think, you know, going back to the climate piece and the environmental piece, is that it's not a shut venue. You haven't got a roof. So if the weather's not good, you actually can't play. The event doesn't happen. And you have a live broadcast window that needs to be played with. So you have a lot of variety of challenges and issues, and a large team. Like the logistics team, Extreme Sailing Series was basically a precursor to SailGP, what it is now, with a far smaller budget, but very similar sailors were competing on the Extreme Sailing Series that are now seen in the skippers of SailGP. The majority of them were on the Extreme Sailing Series, and it's a very similar proposition in that you're bringing sailing to the masses. You're bringing it close to the shore so that people can watch it and people can engage with it more and more. Whereas, you know, in the past, sailing was seen as the boat would sail off, everyone would clap, and then 40 days later it would come back and everyone would clap again. But no one would really understand what happened in the meantime. And I think the Extreme Sailing Series and subsequently the SailGP and the America's Cup have become a lot more open to the layman understanding what's going on, so that they can engage with all aspects, whether it's the technology, the building of the boats, the speed, the athleticism. You've got a bit for everyone in there. And then from OC Sport and the Extreme Sailing Series, I moved to World Sailing. And again, it's a completely different beast. You know, I think international federations like the ITF or World Sailing is, you're typically always the ones doing wrong and not doing it tailored to everyone, because you have a generic approach or a policy to the majority of what you're trying to do, which is, it tends to be growing the sport. And we had some amazing projects again at World Sailing, where we had the World Sailing Trust, which was the philanthropic arm of World Sailing. So developing projects like the strategic review of women in sailing, and then the collaboration with Virtual Regatta, which was the e-sport that blew up during COVID, because no one else, you couldn't go sailing. So what else are you going to do? Okay, let's compete on here. And I think we had 2 million people on the start line of the Vendée Globe, the e-Vendée Globe. So those projects were amazing. And then we had really fantastic partners. So SAP, Rolex, Mount Gay Rum, we had Hempel. So all of them were supporting in a various different way. And then we had Musto Kit that now have, since I left World Sailing, have now partnered with a really great project around women in sailing. And it's going from strength to strength. So it's really amazing to see what the sport of sailing is doing, and how World Sailing are interacting with the pinnacle of sport, like the Ocean Race, the America's Cup, SailGP, etc.
Definitely.
So, I mean, it's been a bit of a wild ride, but you're learning all the time, and you know, I've learned a lot from sponsors as to what their expectations are and what they see as value, and how that value is completely varied from one sponsor to the other. You know, if their logo is there, it might be of value to one, but it might not be of value to the other, and it's more the consistent support that is of value. So yeah, it's the variety that's really interesting.
For sure. So first of all, what a career. And I noticed that, you know, tennis and sailing, that's the sports that you grew up and what you liked. And the same for myself, that we are, you know, in a fortunate position to work in and within sports that we really love.
Oh, it's a privilege. It's a dream. And I think, you know, when all seems like it's a complete mess and things are going wrong, you just have to take a step back and be like, I work in what most people have as a hobby.
Yeah.
You know, they want to finish work and do sport, whereas I am in it all the time. So I think that reality is you need to take a step back sometimes and be like, this is an absolute privilege to have my hobby or to use my skill sets, however small, to apply to something that I love and I have passion for.
Agreed. I would like to dissect what you said a little bit, because when you went through your career, so in the end you mentioned with the sponsorships you have learned a lot from them, and just to mention a few: Rolex, SAP, Hugo Boss, Jaguar, very wide spectrum but huge brands.
Yep.
So you said you learned a lot. Can you mention something you learned in specifically in regards to the sponsorships, maybe?
Yeah, so I guess specific examples, let's take SAP, who are a global tech juggernaut, and they saw tennis and they also saw sailing as a way to showcase their technology that they use in everyday business in a really authentic way to create insight into sports that can be quite hard to understand. So again, we'll go back to the sailing example, but when I was sailing and I would compete, I would go out, I would come back, and then I would tell my parents, who were not sailors at all, I won this race because I was really skilled, and it worked out for me because I made all the right decisions. Or I would come back and say, do you know what? I was cheated today. The wind changed at the wrong time and I was robbed, and that's why I didn't win. Whereas with SAP solutions, you can't do that anymore, because you will very quickly be able to tell why one boat has won over the other. And for the layman, it gives an insight into a sport that was very closed. So even 20 years ago, 25 years ago, it was an art, or it was a mystery. And diving into the details and providing data or providing TV overlays and graphics tracking, even my parents could understand, okay, this is why he's doing well, or this is actually why the other people are doing well. And it was objective. And then with the SAP solution, the SAP Analytics, it had loads of touch points for other stakeholders. So for example, judging or officiating of the racing becomes a lot easier if you have tracking solutions. Looking at it from a broadcast or commentary perspective, you can see how with win-based leaderboards, as an example, which was a new technology that they brought in, you can not have a situation like we had at the Olympic Games, where the broadcast is focused on a boat that might be closer to the mark, but is actually not leading. So you're screaming and shouting for this person, and then all of a sudden, boom, 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 5 boats round the top mark before that boat. And then all of a sudden the broadcast has to switch to another group of boats. But all these things, they've provided value and development for the growth of the sport. And for me, coming from a fairly conservative sponsorship background, all I thought was, how do we get their brand, their badge up in lights so that everyone can see it? Whereas what they wanted to do was really add value to the sport, and in return, they get brand awareness, but they're providing a solution for as broad a list of stakeholders as possible, and create value for the sport. And I think the same within tennis. They worked with the WTA for quite a while to provide insights and to get the coaches on court to talk to the players, which was only seen in the Fed Cup or Davis Cup. And understand why you're applying certain tactics or strategies at the start of a match, or how you adapt during a match. It is quite insightful. I think it's pretty amazing. And then some of the support from Rolex and the way in which they look at sport, they say that they support sport. They're not partners. They support sports, and they within a selection of sports, they provide some of the most amazing support for the development and growth. And I think, you know, the way in which they are consistent and regular and are always looking 2 or 3 years ahead. And, you know, they also stood by the majority of their sports when rights were not delivered. And it's amazing because they see the long game and that they're here for a long time. And, you know, that's how they protect their reputation. That's how they protect their authenticity. And they also are very, very knowledgeable about the sports that they provide support for. So those types of things are, you know, invaluable. And, you know, the way in which we try and run Sporting Giants cherry picks some of the attributes there that we thought, yeah, these are non-negotiables. These are things that we would love to see if we can emulate within our day-to-day. Because when you go from an employee to running a business, you know, you could do anything you want. So you've got to have a foundation or a premise on how you then run that business. Otherwise, you just get lost and you just start shooting from the hip and you don't know where you're going.
Yeah. No, so first of all, when you talked about SAP and Rolex, like that shows also what we talked about before with purposeful partnerships, that you add value to something. So really, really interesting point. And now you brought up again, you have been an employee all your life, and now you're a founder. So what would you say? What are the biggest changes to now versus being an employee?
We talked about privilege of being able to work in sport, but the privilege that we have now is the ability to pick and choose who we work with, both as experts within the company and who we bring on to support us, but also the projects that we take on, and not taking on projects where we don't add value. Because I think we were very defensive right at the start that we work with people that we enjoy working with, because every day then we can come back from holiday or we can come back from you know, a big event tired, but still want to do it. And that is a privilege and something that we are always wanting to protect. And the other side of it is I work with a partner who is so complementary from a skill sets point of view to mine. And, you know, I can lean on him for all sorts of things. And then we have a team that supports us that are amazing. But, you know, it's something that we have the ability to create ourselves, and we can cherry pick who we want to work with and on what. So that's a real privilege. And I think the other thing that I would say is that you're always looking to, from a financial point of view, not to go wrong, but the way in which we do that is making sure that we're always providing the best we possibly can, the solutions, the best possible solutions that we can for the people that we're working with. And then that normally protects the financial side, which can be the scary part of setting up a business. I think a lot of people are fearful of, you know, not being able to pay their mortgage or support their children. We were very fearful of making sure that we provided for the people that trusted us to provide for them. So it's a very different thing. And within international sports federations or NGBs, some of your direction is completely out of your control. And typically there's a board of directors or vice presidents that have been elected that steer the direction of the boat, for want of a better word. Whereas now we steer our own boat. So if we screw up, it's completely our fault. You know, we've got no one else to blame. And that's quite an exciting position to be in as well, is that, you know, we're always wanting to do the best. Because we know that if if it's not the best, it's only our fault, really, that we can blame ourselves.
Yeah. So it's more freedom, but more responsibility and accountability, I guess.
Yeah, and I think that the other thing that's quite humbling is when we were setting up, we were having conversations with people like, do you think we should do this? And a lot of them were like, yeah, go for it. Like, absolutely fine, knowing that they were not risking anything.
Mm.
But that feedback led us to be like, yeah, do you know what? We're going to go for it. Let's do it. But it's those people that then support you going forward. That's what's humbling, is that those people then from all different parts of your career have then gone, yeah, do you know what? What do you need? How can we help you? We believe in you. And that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. If rounding off here soon, just you mentioned a great on your first job at the at the
IT.
IT, at ITF, sorry, at your first job at ITF, yeah, that there was a great guy that you worked under there, and I usually ask, who do you think would be a good future guest on this podcast? So maybe he could be one of them.
Yeah, I think Miguel would be awesome. And just for further context, he actually married us in Valencia. So when Rachel and I went back to Valencia after being in London for a very long time, we wanted to get married. And we thought, well, Valencia was always a place that we loved, so let's do it there. And what better person to speak and to orchestrate our wedding with than him? But no, I think for me as well in my career, I've always had, or even growing up, I've always had these mentors or role models, and maybe I didn't know them growing up, but I I was definitely good at being a sponge and trying to absorb as much as I possibly could from all the individuals that I was coming across, and then also being like, do you know what, that attribute I might leave just for you, and but the rest of it I want to make sure that I'm improving or aspiring to be like these people. And I've been lucky enough to go from one to the other, back to one to the other, and bouncing up my career path. And you know, having that consistency and those people within my career have also been a great sounding board for my next moves, or saying, look, I'm thinking about doing this, or what do you think about this? Is this normal? And they'll always give me honest feedback, and it's been an amazing support for my career. But I would say, yeah, I mean, Miguel for sure. You need to get him on board, and if you need his details, I'll send you them. But he's a very well respected leader, especially within participation and coach development, and he speaks probably 7 languages. I don't know how many, but he's pretty up there. And I think one of the main reasons why I left Valencia is because I knew that I could not do his job as well as he could. And I wouldn't be able to replace him. So that was really pretty amazing.
Wow. Yeah, I'm sold. That sounds like a great guest.
Yeah.
As someone who has worked in the sport industry for quite some time, what would be some advice that you have for young people who wants to pursue a career in sport?
Well, we touched on mentoring. So I think I was speaking very much about how I've been mentored. They might not have known it, but I've taken mentors throughout my career, and I've been able to see, right, if I want to do this, what attributes or what values or what competencies do I need to have to get to that level? And that makes it very easy for me to understand, right, I will progress like that. So it gives me a step on the ladder as to what I need to achieve. And then the other side of that is making sure that you are mentoring, or you are trying to bring people on that ride with you and to help assist them where you can, because you also learn by coaching. And the way in which I interact with a lot of people who are asking for advice is a coaching role, because you don't want to be a dictator and direct them in specific pathways. You want them to feel their way through and identify the course that they want to go on. But yeah, the mentoring side is definite. So if if you identify certain people within your career or within your network that you think, do you know what, I could learn a lot from this person, go in and be a sponge, like just absorb as much as you possibly can. I think the other thing that was key is understanding where you can add value. So what are you good at, what are you not good at, and understanding that as early as you possibly can, and making sure that you can work with people who are far better than you in the areas that you're not good at. And I think having that humility has been key. So yeah, that would be one thing. And then the other thing is always knowing that when you're creating relationships, if you finish that role, that relationship doesn't end. And staying in touch with people. And I'm super lucky that a lot of the people that I work with or have worked with are very, very close friends. And I'm still really close friends with the people I worked with at the ITF, and they've gone on to do some amazing things, whether it's the IOC or Man City or et cetera, et cetera. They've gone throughout the whole world of sport. And yeah, so making sure that you keep feeding that network and keeping it alive and constant is a huge asset of mine for sure. And creating those relationships benefits you over and over and over again, and they benefit hopefully over and over and over again.
I love that. I think it's great advice with networking, mentoring, and then be a sponge, and also try to mentor someone else whenever you have the opportunity. As you said, you learn a lot.
If you have the privilege to be able to do that, it is amazing. I've had it a couple of times, and hopefully they've felt some value from it.
I'm sure they did. Before we sign off, is there something I haven't asked you yet that you want to mention?
No, I think it's no, I think it's all good. It's been a real insight into my own. It's like an obituary, but performed by yourself. So no, it's been really fun, and yeah, thanks so much for having me on. It's been awesome.
It's my pleasure. So Scott Over, thank you so much for taking the time to be on Sports Management Podcast.
Thank you very much. Cheers, Marcus.
Cheers.